Good morning. Namaste. So when my husband Adi and I got married, we had the fortune of his aunt and uncle being able to be the people who married us. You could say ministers, but they weren't really active ministers, but they were the officiants. And were able to marry us. And his uncle did a lot of the speaking in the ceremony. And he, I think he went to some effort to gather a few stories about each of us to kind of weave into the ceremony. And I remember the standout story about Adya was he spoke about Adya being a young boy and coming home to his mother, bleeding and, cut up and banged up and bleeding. And his mother's like, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, I was on my bike." I think he was maybe about, I don't know, I'm thinking he was maybe about 10 or maybe 8 or I'm not sure. But he was on his bike, which he loves to ride bikes. And he said, "I was on my bike and I was thinking, what would it be like to be a blind person riding my bike?" And he had a good stretch of road in front of him. And he's just like riding his bike with his eyes closed. And it's going really, really, really well for quite a while until bang. And he said, "Mom, I hit a parked car." But it really spoke to his curious nature, and in large part he has a fearless nature. And so I thought, okay, that's a great story about Adya. It made everybody laugh in the wedding. And then he thought, okay, so this is the uncle, so here Adya grows up and he finds himself a wonderful woman to marry. And I have very few interactions with her, but let me tell you about my most recent interaction with her. So he describes going to this rehearsal dinner where he's getting to know me a little bit better. And all of a sudden, toward the end of the dinner, I stand up and I say, "Okay, guys, we have to have a quick powwow about the wedding." And I stand up in my wedding event manager mode. And he's telling the story that, I kid you not, she gets out this huge chart. This chart that's like a big picture of the hall where the ceremony and the reception are going to be in. And she's out there like with the pointer saying, "Okay, you guys, you're on this and it's over here and this is your job and this is your job over here." And, this total organizational person. And he thought that the two of us together would somehow find a sense of balance. Although the story of me wasn't quite as fun, there is some truth to that. And I thought about that story this morning because I spent about 45 minutes trying to work on a chart for you guys. And I kept thinking, do I abandon this? Or do I keep with it and stick with it to see if maybe I can come up with just a really simple image of what I want to try to convey? And as I think sometimes reducing something down to something elegantly simple takes often much greater effort than, saying, too much with too much detail. And so we'll see how what I want to convey comes out. But the charts are actually they're on little pieces of paper this big, because that's the paper I found, that you can see. I don't know if you saw, there's a few scrap papers outside the kitchen. And I thought, well, that won't be very visible. But I brought them in my bag in case I need to refer to them. But I wanted to just try to explain something in a way that I think all of us might know, but I want to just order it in a certain way to give us an orientation for the next piece of the foundation of our retreat. So there's a tendency of thinking mind, to like to map and organize and give us a sense of orientation that we can relax into. Okay, if I have this sense of structure or the lay of the land, then I can rest. I have peace of mind, I have peace of being, and it gives me a way to orient. So having said that, there's a way that the whole of this moment, when the mind is still and it's not referencing the various parts and pieces and boxing things up, it's really quite undivided. And so that sense of our undivided being can all of a sudden start to feel more pieced out and separated out when the referencing mind starts to objectify everything in its distinction. And that's a very handy tool to be able to have, to kind of navigate the world of distinction and to kind of know, okay, we don't all sit in the same chair or put the same spoon in our mouth, or whatever it might be. It's great to have distinction, and yet when I talk about what I'm going to talk about, I'm very mindful that this distinction is just one way of mapping in the infinite expressions of distinction that make up the whole. And I borrow a bit from Adya because I'll begin with something that may sound more familiar, but I'll try to say it in a unique way, or maybe perhaps different than you've heard. We'll see. Adya talks about kind of two tracks of practice and how those might unfold. And there's the sense of us being a human being, really encountering how might it be that we might live a better life. How might our behaviors become more sane or more refined or more enjoyable or more harmonious or more free from suffering or division. And then there's like a whole other track of spiritual practice, which is not so concerned with how do I go about living my life and relate to my thoughts or myself or others. The other track is more about who and what am I essentially that is living this life. And what actually is this sense of life in its essence? And how might I be more conscious of that so that when I do go about asking how I live my life, that sense of being conscious of who and what I am is brought with us into every activity that we do. Bringing the full measure of who and what we are into whatever it is that we're doing. And so there can often be this kind of vying for real estate of our attention. Do we give attention to the particulars of our life and how to go about living it, or do we give attention to this sense of the essential nature of ourselves and of life? And often in spiritual practice, there's more room for those essential questions. And often people come into spiritual practice because at some level they sense this preoccupation with the content of their lives, their thoughts, their emotions. Even often, a couple people have mentioned trauma. Sometimes there's just this feeling that just keeps pulling us into its realm, and there's some sense of some instinct, isn't there another way that's just not all about this content that seems to pull my attention into it. And so often that will bring people to spirituality, and it's not only through difficulty. There may also be these sort of tugs in our being, just some sense of there's more to all of this, and there's more to all of what I am that seems like it feels like it wants to break free of the bounded habitual behaviors. And so that tugs at us, at people. I know it's tugged at me. And so we may find ourselves drawn to spirituality and drawn to a way to address both how we might live a more effectual life, but also to know who it is that we are that's doing this business of living. And so in the midst of it all, there seems to be this vying for our attention. And one wonderful thing about coming on retreat, and I celebrate being here with you in this, is that there is this kind of unspoken orientation, or maybe it is very conscious in your mind, this sense of, okay, for this time, I'm going to allot a good measure, if not a full measure, of my attention to this track of essential being. And I think that the two tracks aren't separate. Even though I'm talking about them as two different things, they really need each other and complement each other. So it's not even necessarily true that we can dedicate a retreat to just, embarking on immersing ourselves more in the orientation toward essential being. That might be a large measure of our intent, but then there's often the more obvious reality that our attention is needed in multiple arenas. And so one way you could think about it is, if you were to think about the top track being this realm of form, and for now we'll just call the bottom tracks or more of the realm of awareness. And so you could say that awareness sometimes feels like it's needing to evolve. And you can even think of it, if you want to feel this more organically, you can think of the yin-yang symbol. You could think of the form as the yin, the dark teardrop, and awareness as the less gross and more subtle, energetic form of the yang. And so it's as though just through the natural way of things, they're interconnected and they are interdependent. They need one another. And one is seeking to grow and transform into the other as the other one, may feel like it wanes and gains residency in its opposite. So they're mutually transforming and becoming each other all the time. And so there's this sense that form is often pulling for attention in order for it to thrive. I mean, we know this, right? As you think of children or plants or animals, I mean, they thrive with attention. And us as big kids and adults, we thrive with attention. That's what makes things vital. And form is wanting that expression of awareness that is directed as attention. And awareness, it really can't know itself unless it has form and our form, to look out through our senses and to know life in form. But it can't know itself as an expression of life without form to give it structure and capacity. And so often spirituality can feel like this combination of form either wanting to be rectified and liberated in the light of awareness, or to thrive with attention, and then awareness wanting to take shape and become embodied. So you could think of, if you think of these tracks of form and awareness, you could think of the spiritual path as form seeking to be liberated and awareness seeking to be embodied. Like that. That's sort of the cycle of the two together. So the task before us as practitioners can be a little bit tricky in the sense of, do I, do I just orient toward awareness? Well, that's a big part of it, but there's also sometimes great emphasis on forms in practice, like let's say posture or qigong or things that are physical, things that give a context that's being made ready and available for awareness to be able to embody itself in form in a more and more conscious way. So mostly as you're listening, there might be a part of you is like, let me try and have this picture or kind of get all these concepts straight, but mostly just try to have the feel of it. I'd recommend feel of what I'm saying. And just whatever gets in will get in, whatever doesn't, you can just try to have faith that it will sink in or be let go of in whatever measures needed. So in this retreat, we have this this kind of combination of activities, and each of them has their place in helping foster a sense of balance or a sense of addressing both sides of this equation. And yesterday I was talking about this sense of a kind of reckoning that may happen at the beginning of spirituality, or at the beginning of a retreat. It could be at the beginning of a day or the end of the day, whatever it might be, where there might be this sense of, okay, sometimes attention and form become very enmeshed and identified. When we give attention to certain, beliefs or concerns or ideas, constructs, ideas of ourself, the world, and they keep getting lots and lots of attention, and they become more concretized, and they become more fixed, and then we become so identified that those patterns are fixed and habituated, and our sense of awareness kind of shrinks and becomes less conscious and becomes more identified. And so in this reckoning, there's this first step that I was talking about. Like, is there any way to sort of step back and get a sense of objectivity and looking and noticing the thoughts and the content of our experience? How have I been behaving by what value systems, and and what thinking patterns have been in play. And then there's also, in that sense of spaciousness, there develops this greater capacity to not only see, like that power of being able to see more and more clearly, and to listen to what's unfolding more and more clearly, which you guys do beautifully here. That's part of the structure here, is just developing these great powers of concentration to see and to listen and to be with. And this is all part of strong practice, And in that sense of stepping back and developing those powers of attention and concentration, there also begins to develop this power of almost more of an intuitive capacity to know, oh, this is what's important to me, and this is less important, and this is what really resonates with me, and this over here, this feels off, or this feels like it may need more work, or to be seen more clearly, so that we might know how to parse out what's valuable within it, and what is maybe illusory or unnecessary at this point, or etc. And so it's a super important territory of spirituality that's not just at the beginning. This is developing capacities that serve us all throughout life and throughout the entire spiritual path. So, part of what's happening in this is there's a kind of parsing out and becoming more conscious of form and awareness. And so yesterday I was saying, as you step back and you get a sense of the sense of yourself as subject, one of the ways that I was pointing to that wasn't so much the sense of the I thought, like, I'm the one who has these thoughts or believes these things, but the sense of yourself as subject, as I am that which is bearing witness to all of these unfoldings of experience and these expressions of my thoughts and feelings and personalities and the world at large. And in that stepping back, we begin to notice life and the world more consciously, because not so much of our energy and attention is drawn back into the me-centric experience that has a tendency to, or propensity to, lead toward identification. So I'm certainly not against me time or the sense of being, each of us being unique and having our unique interests and needs and concerns, but when it really goes on overdrive, or it goes to the extreme, it becomes so concrete and concretized and narrowed that there's not often the room for a more spacious awareness that's more connected to the whole of life. And so that stepping back and parsing out this adherence of attention to forms or thought, feeling objects, the parsing out of that begins to happen as the attention loosens and the identification loosens, and our identity begins to take on the transmission of a more spacious awareness. And what can happen often in this process also is there's usually first, it doesn't always play out all the ways that I'm mapping things like in the order I'm mapping them, but often there's components of what I'm speaking of. So often there's a kind of stepping back and noticing and acknowledging, oh, I noticed I was caught in my thoughts. Or, oh, I noticed that I'm feeling this feeling. Or I notice I'm distracting myself from feeling this feeling. But all of that, all of those are moments where you can acknowledge, oh, this is what I am as awareness, or this is consciousness expressing its awareness of objects of perception, or awareness of experience. And each time you acknowledge that you sense, oh, perhaps this is who I am. And it may not be the whole of who you are, but oh, maybe I'm not just my thoughts or my feelings. Maybe there's this sense of what I am that is that which is aware of them. And so that identity, becomes perhaps more, it shifts more into this sense of what I would call the witness. Now, the witness is used in different ways. And so I'm using it in more of a, not so much like somebody stuck in the absolute sort of sense of sometimes that's used as somebody like stuck in the witness. I'm just sort of talking about a functioning, like, oh, I'm able to witness my thoughts. I'm able to see, the feelings that are arising. And that can sometimes feel a little bit more like the enmeshed identification that felt like its own sort of insular paradigm. That begins to shift and you go, oh, okay, there's more space here, and there's my sense of myself that's bearing witness to the content. And then what I like to say is that from that position of witness that feels like it's at point A, observing all these objects at point B, C, D, E, F, G, that sense of witness at point A, when it begins to take on more of the felt sense of spacious awareness, and when it softens from its position and identity as I am the witness that sees these things or observes these things, but when there's just that sense that I was trying to encourage yesterday, like, what is that sense of the subject that's looking out your eyes and walking around, and when it becomes more connected with the whole of activity, and it's not just that kind of witnessing that has the spotlight of your attention locking onto things, like, oh, this is my thought that I'm tracking. Oop, this is the feeling I feel in this part of my body. That kind of witness with its flashlight of attention, being directed. But when it begins to just open and there's a sense of, okay, what is this sense of aware being that is moving through life? And it may feel a little bit more like I remember this as a kid. Maybe you remember this, where you're just sitting there and you're just taking in the whole scene. I don't know. I still do it sometimes, and maybe you guys do it too. Like, Audrey talks about porch sitting, where you're just kind of hanging back and you're taking in the scene. Or, I got to fly here and be in an airport and just see people from all ages and walks of life, from business suits to sweatpants and everything in between, and just kind of taking in like the play of humanity. But it's different when your vision softens like that and just kind of gets the impression of the whole of it. And you feel less like you're the witness of it and more just like the sense of more relaxed observing in just a very receptive space of just kind of taking it all in, but not feeling like it's your job to take it in, or that you have to hold any of it. It's just kind of, and then it may touch you in certain ways or impact you in certain ways, but there's that kind of spacious observing, so a lot of it doesn't really even stick. It just kind of passes through. And I like to say that that's a focused attention that begins to relax into a kind of more global attention. And then I would use these words, then I would say that kind of global attention has the possibility of just kind of relaxing into a general awareness. I think mostly we associate the word attention with directionality, either focused, or general. But when there's less of a sense of the one directing attention, when that sense of ourself becomes more relaxed, then that gives more of the sense that attention gives way to a kind of global awareness, you could say, but it's even without direction. It's just like a kind of general awareness. And maybe at first, when we're in more of the directionality phase, it may feel like what I'm observing is at point B or C or D, and I'm at point A. But as that sense of point A relaxes and becomes more soft, and that witnessing becomes more receptive and observing, and the attention becomes more global, then that sense of subject softens, and it can almost feel like, well, this might be saying a little too much, but I'll say it and try it out, and we'll see if it works. So it can almost feel like, okay, the sense of the subject is just kind of more and more quiet and taking it all in and relax. And it just gives way to this sense of general awareness. And you may even feel like the sense of subject becomes more still and kind of falls away. And sometimes somewhere in here, there's this feeling that you've shifted from the sense of subject being primary, that kind of me-centric experience that's locked in by the objects that are, vying for attention. But you start to shift and get more of a sense of yourself to a subject. And then sometimes there's this feeling like, oh, less and less of me as I knew myself. You feel the paradigm shifting out of the me-centric experience. And then this is the part that I'm not sure will work or not, but you almost feel like, oh, it's all object. And even the thought of myself as a I thought, oh, that's another thought. And even the sense of subject feels more like an object. And whether we call it an object isn't so important. That's the part I'm not sure is working. But you could even say that the whole mechanism of subject-object kind of gives way because they need each other. You know, if the sense of subject gives way, then our object kind of loosens as well. But there might be that sense of, oh my gosh, it's almost all object. And even the idea of myself or everything that arises within is just like the arisings without. You know, you have the sound of the wind in the trees or the car going by in the external world. In the internal world, you have a thought bubble up and pass away, or the, you know, breath come in and the breath go out. And so there's this sense of, oh, okay, it's just all these objects appearing out of nowhere and passing into nowhere. And there's that sense of like the movement of life, but often as the meditator, the observer, the experiencer becomes more quiet, it doesn't always have to go this way, you know, because it's not always easy to access stillness. But this is one way I'm describing. Sometimes when that sense of the meditator, the experiencer, comes to rest, then the sense of the world of subject and object just kind of gives way into the, you could say, into momenting or something. And then, as I alluded to, I think yesterday morning, it might have been the first night, but it was yesterday morning, there can come a phase, which I won't get into this morning, where then that sense of this holistic moment may cycle back around to a sense of distinction without the stickiness of the adherence. Because there's this sort of bright elixir of more wakeful consciousness that tends to allow for a sense of distinction of subject and object and particularness in a way that tends to be less sticky and more in harmony with the push and pull that was previously expressive in the identified, more unconscious state as like a push and pull of ego, you know, grasping and aversion, like kind of defining the sense of the distressed egoic state of division, and the push and pulls of desires and resistance and fascinations and repulsions, you know, kind of that define the egoic state of the unrestful egoic state. Instead, that push and that pull is in this other stage of distinction that is less fraught with a sense of separation and division. The push and pull is more of the yin and yang and the dance of life. And so there's that sense that subject and object return, but in a less concretized way, in a more spacious way, not negating the realization of the paradigm where subject and object need not be referred to. So, if you don't remember any of that, no problem. The main thing that I wanted you to get a sense of was the sense of the parsing out of identification as things begin to kind of differentiate, and we become more conscious of what's in play and more conscious of our nature as awareness. That was the piece that I was aiming at yesterday, but fleshing out a little bit more today that we have more time, because yesterday I really wanted to cover the topics that you all put forward. So as far as our practice goes here, we're kind of working at it from different angles at the same time. You know, there's that sense of sitting down and quiet and stopping and having a deliberate participation in a space and setting where we might become more conscious of the content of our thought. I mean, that's what happens when when you're going to sit still and you can't distract yourself with other activities. Your thoughts are right there, not to be ignored, and your feelings are there. It doesn't mean they have to be indulged, but it's hard to not acknowledge their presence. And so part of what's helpful, and this is a little bit toward I wanted to speak just a little bit about meditation, because you're doing a lot of meditation, and I know all of you have done lots of meditation, and for some people it's more new, but I think it never hurts to just give a little bit more structure for people or notion of what meditation can aim for. So in the meditation process, there's this intentional giving space to be more conscious of what's in play in our experience and where our energy is going to, where our attention is going to. And then we have a greater sense of choice in where we want to direct our attention. Now, as I've said earlier in the talk, one powerful option is to grow your attention into a more global space. So, often I'll encourage in my guided meditations a sense of global listening, global sensing. And it's a way of kind of like, when kids, want your attention and they want it for something very, like, I want this candy bar in the grocery store or whatever it is, and then the parent distracts them with something else, like, oh, isn't that, our neighbor down the street that you like to play with, or whatever it is. So there's that simple art of skillful distraction. So this isn't like at home, like, okay, I'm going to go distract myself with all my entertainments and to-dos, which are great. I'm not against those, but this is a certain setting in meditation where if there's going to be any distracting from all the energy going into identification with thought, it can be wise distraction, we can call it. Like, okay, why don't we widen our attention and give it a much larger pasture? And Adya used to, when he very first taught, I don't hear him talk about so much anymore, talk about the thinking mind as a horse that often is confined into its stall. It's kind of given real estate that it's stuck in. And when your attention gets nice and wide and you listen to the sounds and the environment, and it's not only listening with your hearing, it's like with your whole being, you're sensing it, you're opening, then there's this sense that horse is no longer confined. It's like, oh, now the horse has this big pasture to roam in. So sure, there's thoughts coming up, and sometimes the horse is bucking wildly, like, oh my God, I got let out of the stall. So sometimes the first couple days of the retreat just feels like the mind's just unloading itself and is vehemently throwing off everything that's been stuffed in there for a long time. And it's like, freedom. It starts bucking and, throwing everything off. But eventually, with enough time, realizing, okay, this open pasture's still here. and it's still being offered in meditation with this global attention. And the more it senses that, it starts to calm down and, maybe run it off a little bit, walk, stand, lay down, sometimes back to running. But it just goes into these more normal rhythms that are more organic and you could say just kind of more healthy. And then you can almost feel in this way, especially if you're more devotional or more heartful or interested in that, it's like making friends with your mind and being compassionate and giving it an environment where it can unwind and begin to quiet and settle. It doesn't always have to be quiet, but it can give it perhaps a greater benefit or option to be more quiet in that more natural, open setting. And it's that infusion of spaciousness into that kind of more sticky identification that enables it to sense, like, that sticky identification. It's like, there's all this space I can unwind and, harmonize into, and space is so harmonizing. It's like perhaps the greatest harmonizing principle, and everything that's all stuck and layered upon each other and adhered, it opens and it feels that. And so that's part of the kind of more spacious, open, liberating offering in meditation for form. But then you think, well, what on that side of the two tracks I was talking about, like the form, as I was saying, kind of above, and then below we have this, not that they're above and below, but just as an idea, there's a sense of that track of awareness. Now you could flip them because, like in Qigong, I'm talking more about spirit or formlessness above and earth and form below. So maybe I was doing that backwards. But the reason why I had the other one below is because sometimes it takes sitting down and just kind of sinking in and asking deeper questions like, what am I essentially? And becoming conscious. Sometimes that almost feels like a deeper track, so I think that's why I had it below. But anyway, don't worry about the picture. So the point being, what does awareness need in meditation? Well, that's been a big debate throughout history. So, some people will say, well, is posture in meditation important, or is it not important? And here you have somebody like Adya, who I just chuckle at because I think he's a mischief maker sometimes, at least in part, is that because he's always throwing a wrench into any given adherence. So here he is, sitting in meditation on these retreats that he does that have many periods of meditation in a day, probably the most perfect posture I've ever seen. Doesn't even deviate it from it, perfect hand mudra, perfect, placement of his feet. This is the thing I marvel at. He sits down, he places his feet, places his hands. I hardly ever even see him move them. Then here's Mukti. I get up, I sit down, and I'm like, I think I'll move my right foot like a centimeter to the right. Oh, I think I'll just move my ankles just a little forward so they're right under my knees. Oh, I think I'll just bring my shoulders back so they're right above my hips. Oh yeah, that feels good. Up a little bit forward on my sit bone. Oh, tuck my chin. Oh, my mudra. Oh, I can feel it. Okay. A little bit more containment, a little more expansion. And I literally feel the silhouette of my body. And I'm like, okay, let's fill it energetically. Oh, but I'm also containing. And I'm like going through my little tweaks, right? Right at the beginning of meditation. I try to, kind of go through it quickly, but okay. Is my attention focused? Is it open? Is my heart intimate? Is it open? Is my hara contained but extended into the earth? So there's that kind of, I go through my little things of balance, focus, expansion, grounding, opening, all of these little tweaks. Sometimes I go through my chakras. I'm like, oh, that one's got like all this energy hanging off it. So I I clean my chakras. But all of these little things, and I have my vertical alignment, I have my horizontal alignment, and I kind of do these little intakes. And then I look at Adi, he's just like, boom. And I ask him about the stuff. He's like, oh, I don't go into all that. And I'm like, okay, great. So I notice that when I do all that, then everything's set. And it's, I give it up, and then it's as though it all just sort of finds me, and it just goes, and it comes into balance. So it's sort of like I have the intention to set the posture, and then I let it go, and then the further balancing of the posture, it's like it finds itself. And I'll notice even throughout the meditation, like sometimes the body will just kind of, like it's just sort of finding its way the whole time. And I swear to God, it seems like, because I meditate next to Adi a fair amount, it seems like not a stir. So I don't know that there's any right or wrong in all this, right? But this is the learning, and this is the process. So here Adi is, having this perfect meditation, and then he'll say things like, he'll give a talk, and he's like, let's end. He'll often go over in a talk where it's supposed to be a meditation after, but he runs so far over in the time of the talk that the meditation that was supposed to be a half an hour, 40 minutes, there's like 15 minutes left, and the break is gone. And then he's like, well, let's not bother getting up for a break. Let's just meditate for a few minutes. And then he'll say, oh, but don't get in your meditation posture. Just sit any way you want. And he'll really even encourage that sometimes, like, oh, you don't have to get in a certain posture to meditate. And then I kind of chuckle, because I see his point. So then the question is, like in meditation, if form is kind of loosening and harmonizing with the influx of greater awareness and spaciousness, then as awareness is moving toward embodiment and knowledge, like knowing itself in form, then how might we support that? So for myself, I find that the posture is really helpful. And why I find it helpful is that it creates a sense of balance of yin and yang, and it creates a kind of capacity for the body to become still, and then the thinking mind always follows. I loved this little entry, one-page entry into this book called Zen is Right Here. Stories about Suzuki Roshi, and a lot of them were about, each page was from a different person who knew Suzuki when he was alive, and teaching in San Francisco in the 50s, 60s, around that time. And on this one entry, this person said, I went into a private meeting with Suzuki, and I said, my mind's going crazy, like it's just constantly pulling my attention into it, and I can't seem to focus on my breath or sense of, I don't know what else they said, I'm making this up now, like awareness, whatever it is, those are Mukti things. But they said, my mind's driving me crazy. And Suzuki said, straighten your spine, your mind will become quiet. And I thought, I love this guy. Because that's my direct experience. When the body's aligned, the energies in the body are aligned, and they're not, pulling this way or that way, or they might be pulling, but as soon as you go back to holding your posture, the energies organize around that. And, the meridians are open, everything's flowing, and it can be more calm. And there's less distraction. Eventually, as you get more used to the posture, and the spine becomes a little stronger and the body becomes more used to the posture, and you find relaxation within the form of the posture, then there's a sense that the energies that rise up into mind and activate thought, that they just follow gravity and the settling into the posture, and those energies settle and the mind becomes more quiet. And in this state, the body's in a more subtle, refined state, and that subtlety of awareness is more able to become resident, it feels like, in that more subtle state. It's as though it can become more conscious and embodied in that kind of setting, and is just more easeful to take up residency. And the space of our being isn't being fraught with these energies of push and pull and more of a chaotic energy that it seems to obscure that more conscious awareness, which is a more subtle thing. And so the way you could think about it in the yin-yang symbol is when yin becomes its greatest, like when the dark teardrop gets biggest, that's when it transforms into yang, right? That's when yang starts to gain. And so when the body's more still and settled, that's when the yang begins to grow. That's when the awareness begins to grow toward the yin again. It's growing toward form. And it's gaining and gaining in its momentum into form. And so that's one of the beauties of meditation and resting in a greater sense of stopping. Now, I know I'm going over. I'm pulling an Adya. But I won't be too much longer. I'm almost completed with the talk. One of the difficulties from the track of our humanness is in the track of this world of form and the world of navigating by thoughts and feelings and sensations. Part of that paradigm is that sometimes there is a certain kind of association with stillness that is a negative association. And it can be from all kinds of reasons. We were put down or, belittled or, like confined, who knows, like with punishments or, some people just feel jailed when they're asked to like sit still and, not to move. And they'll take it as a directive, or a command or, supposed to. And it can feel really confining. And it feels, sometimes people will hear it internally more like, be still, and they're just like, what? Like, no, And, it just feels like someone's asserting their will over them or something. And it just doesn't feel good. Now, like on the other extreme, I really was drawn to stillness and was really asking myself in my practice about 25 years ago, what is rest? What is rest and stillness in the midst of activity? with all the doings and, activity, how might I know what is not defined by activity? And, I was really contemplating, well, what is rest? What is peace in the midst of activity? And so I was orienting toward it as not as a supposed to, but as a get to. I would love to get to have some peace and stillness in the midst of all this activity. And it was a different kind of attitude or relationship with it, and more of a, like, just a physical yearning, without putting all this energy. God, I just love to rest. I just love to have it all stop for a bit, And so I had like a really positive association with stillness as a great, gift. But I think in that stepping back that I was talking about at the beginning, where we see how our thoughts are structured and what's informing them and what beliefs and associations we have with things, when we become more conscious of them, then we have opportunity to say, oh, maybe they don't have to be held this way. Maybe my relationship with stillness could be different. And for that matter, what even is stillness? Is it just like a physical thing? Is it, I think somebody used a beautiful phrase the other day, something like the generosity of stillness. I thought, how poetic, And it reveals a kind of relationship with stillness that it's not, something that's generous it doesn't feel like something static, and confined. So I was like, okay, so what is stillness? And is stillness actually, a kind of static state, or might it be something more alive and dynamic, and which sounds like an oxymoron, right? Like dynamic stillness, but maybe the stillness that people are speaking of to come upon in meditation isn't the notion of stillness that I think of in terms of, I don't know, like my image was like a ball rolling to a stop or something. And so asking these kind of questions, what am I? What is stillness? What is movement? What is liberation? What is embodiment? What is death? What is birth? That kind of speaks to that whole lower track when I began the talk. There's the preoccupation with thoughts and feelings and how to have a better experience and live life in a certain way. And then there's that track of like, well, what actually is all of it? And how might I know it directly in experience, in a knowingness of being that's different than the knowing of a concept? And is that movement to know in being a movement of form to be more conscious, or awareness to be more embodied in being? There's this sort of, that's where sort of it all comes together. That sense of being in form more consciously, with awareness, and awareness being in form knowingly. And so that sort of blending of all these is this that sense of embodied awareness and and liberated form, in a sense. So you can go by feel with that, more than the words. That was my challenge this morning, is what words can I reduce all this to? That's less important than the feel. It's like the feel of the dance of these, and how they're mutually supportive and interconnected and expressive of a whole. And to also get a sense that it could be that what I'm giving my best efforts to describe is more of the way of things. And that makes all of this, in one sense, less personal. Like, okay, I have how my life is played out. And, when all the variables were stacked certain ways, it led to certain outcomes. And yet, somehow, all of this seems to be held within certain, what it kind of feels like, paradigms and structures that lend themselves to certain outcomes. Somehow that yin is moving toward yang, and yang is moving toward yin, and there's some intelligence at work here that my life and how it's unfolding is a part of, and it seems subject to these laws and influences. And in some ways that makes it a little less personal, in the sense that we may free ourselves from, the taking on all the credit or blame for what's happened. But in another sense, there's something about it that's deeply personal, because there's this sense of, this is like the organic expression of life, and I am life, and this is the very expression and flow and dance of what I am, and to know that, and to align with that, and to choose that, is something deeply, deeply personal. Okay. Namaste.